So we are the only thing between you all and drinks, so we better make it interesting. So, of course, there's been a lot to digest over the last 2 days. It's almost like information overload that I talked about in my opening remarks, and more like a tsunami of thought leadership, or I would say binge-watching documentaries on the Learning Channel. But hopefully, you will have some good takeaways, and that's what Sasi and Sidney are here for in this session, to kind of put a bookend to what's been talked about, and then ruminate a little bit about AI and how it impacts the human future. So if I were to build a word cloud of what we talked about, the topics, from omniverse to verse of things to AI, analytics, big data, data lakes, IoT, intelligent automation, drones, autonomous machines, there's been a lot. And what I'm hoping is that, we'll pull it all together. So I'm just going to ask a few quick questions first about the day and a half of topics, and then we'll jump into, how do we make this imagination age happen, and what does it mean for humanity as a whole, right? I want to start with you first, Sasi. And first of all, of course, to just introduce you, Sasi is currently CIO at Washington State University. But before that, he was CIO with NASA. So he's sent, obviously, spacecrafts up in the sky and worked on real robots. And Sidney, she's been a thought leader and one of the pioneers in intelligent automation, right now heading intelligent automation for Spotify. So she builds software bots, and she's even written a book on it. So starting with you, Sasi, one of the sessions yesterday on the emerging tech was about from crypto to quantum, right? So do you think blockchain is finally enterprise ready? What's your view on that?
Okay, well, I hope the folks in the audience, they're not betting on blockchain. The fact of the matter is, it is still, I would say, in my opinion, beginning to commercialize, at least on the higher ed market. What we are actually looking to see is, instead of the university owning the transcripts, have individual students own it. And the reason we are looking at that is because we want every student to take a number of courses from multiple institutions. And it'll be very difficult to have a single institution hold all that. It's much easier if the student themselves hold that in a manner in which it is totally encrypted and only cannot be defaced or modified. And the universities actually can provide the authentication for those individual certificates. So we see a good application there, but I think it has to become far more commercialized than to get, I would say, a wider application of that technology.
Okay. And quickly, how long do you think before enterprises should start thinking about quantum, bringing quantum into the enterprise environment?
Yeah, so as you know, both Microsoft and IBM and others already have commercial enterprises using quantum computing. So in that context, higher speed computing, what we call high performance computing, I think it's going to essentially transition into the quantum side. And from there, actually, one of the things that is looked at is what is the impact of cryptography as we move into quantum, because a lot of the things that are available right now potentially can be broken. Yep. With higher speed computing that quantum basically promises us. So it's going to be one of these debates as to who's ahead, who's on first, and who's going to be farther ahead, the cryptography or the high performance computing component. It's going to be interesting times.
Yeah, so we had a session earlier on cyber warfare. So you think that's probably going to drive enterprises first to adopt quantum computing to fight against the cyber hackers who are breaking into these cryptographic codes?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Sidney, there was a session just a while ago on ESG, balancing planets and profit. So while we talked about clean energy, clean tech, do you think this is going to be the next big opportunity for enterprises to leverage?
I do, but I also think that there may be some biases that exist today that could potentially hinder, I'll say, the exponential growth within that field. Several of our speakers touched on communities that are disproportionately affected from a socioeconomic standpoint. And when we think about sustainability, climate change, those communities are going to be severely impacted, more so than others. And the question becomes, are we building, I'll say, business enterprises that are willing to address those stakeholders in addition to the stakeholders that are in different social spheres? So I think that at the end of the day, we have to come together to understand how we're going to tackle this, no matter the distribution of wealth within different communities, and that's on a global scale. If we don't, I fear that we're going to get into similar scenarios that we have in other industries where there are communities that are not being heard in relation to the struggles that they have, whether it's with adoption of the technology or just their community being addressed properly in terms of their needs.
Okay. Sasi, you saw the session on digital workplaces of tomorrow. So how is the future workplace going to look like? Is it going to be hybrid? Is it going to be in the metaverse, in the cloud somewhere?
I think it's going to be everywhere. In fact, I like to say work is something that you do. It's not a place you go to. So if you adopt that statement, it's basically you work whenever you can from anywhere, any location securely. So it really depends on how what I would say the marketplace will support that type of what I would call freedom of work. It's almost like we're going back to the old cottage industry times where you can have your own little shop, manufacture whatever it is in a smaller scale, and then basically put it on the web and sell it. So I think every employee now is going to become an entrepreneur on their own right. And it's up to companies to marshal those individual contributors into a workforce. And I think that'll be, in my opinion, that's going to be a very, very competitive marketplace for workers in the future. And I think industries are going to have to really change how they treat people, how they provide compensation, and total flexibility in the workplace. I think gone are the days where the supervisor will walk down the hall, make sure everybody's sitting in their cubicle or individual offices. I think those days are gone. If you think that's the way it's going to be in the future, well, I would rather not invest in those companies. In fact, there's a social responsibility component that you have to consider as well, because it's not just only developing the employee, it's actually developing the whole village of society. And I think industries need to, and companies need to pay attention to that.
Yeah, in fact, I feel people now want to work from home and mingle in the office,
yes.
Right? So you want to make workplace more fun also.
Yeah, actually, if I could just add to that, when March of 2020, when we all went remote instruction, we did a lot of things through Zoom and Teams and so on and so forth. But after 2 years, we decided to have in-person instruction. Even though we kind of advertised that, the students really wanted to come back to campus, but they didn't want to come to classes. So they still wanted to take the classes remotely, but they want the experience of what you said, which is basically hanging out with their friends, fraternities, sororities, going to games, athletics. So they wanted the physical experience of that connectivity with other fellow human beings. So here we are talking about, we had to force the faculty members to teach remotely. Now we had to force them to come back to class. And so neither the faculty nor the students really want to have in-class instruction. It's sort of a strange irony of sorts.
Yeah. In fact, I remember just ad-libbing here. We had a session on higher education just I think a year ago.
Yeah.
We talked about that in the future. You think people may want to get hybrid degrees from multiple universities.
Yeah.
You think that's
Absolutely.
happening?
That's why I was talking about the blockchain, where that could be a really good application for that.
Right. So I could have some courses from Harvard, some others from MIT, others from Stanford.
Yep. Absolutely.
Oh, great. Great disruption there.
Yes.
So Sidney, as the intelligent automation guru, you heard the previous session on digital operations, and we've other sessions on smart factories and digital health. So how do you think automation is really changing the game?
I think it is asking us to really redefine what work means. And that is fundamentally scary for a lot of organizations. We've had the concerns around remote work. We've had the concerns around what does it mean to manage a globally distributed team. What does this do when you talk about supply chain and people being in the factory, out of the factory? How do you manage that? And what it comes down to is we need to fundamentally reevaluate the ways that we work across these different industries. And we almost need to think of it as if work did not exist the way that it exists today, can we just recreate a new world where we have, virtual workers? We actually take the workforce, and rather than having these kind of silos of automation that humans are still high touch points, can we eliminate that, and can it become a seamless, almost augmentation of the human workforce? I think if we can find industries where they are willing to embrace the digital worker to a point where that entity becomes a valuable team member, that's going to be a game changer.
Okay. And do you think citizen automation is here to stay?
I do. I think that
maybe you want to first talk about what it is.
Yeah, I think that, when we talk about citizen development, there's been a lot of buzz around low code, no code. Can we take business stakeholders that typically are not as nuanced with engineering, different processes? Like, we actually upskill them and teach them how to build their own small kind of automations. I think that it is one piece of the puzzle in terms of a broader kind of transformation of your workforce. So it's not something you can solely rely on, but I think that it is very effective when combined with additional technologies like a center of excellence, you have governance framework, right? And then you're building out also the knowledge base within your business stakeholders. You're building that trust in terms of
you don't want it to be rampant or chaotic or unmanaged.
I think that initially when the topic was brought up, it was thought, oh, everyone can become a citizen developer. And I don't know that that necessarily gives you the ROI that you think that it does. I think that there are pockets of innovation where you have business stakeholders that are excited about that accelerated learning, being able to engage in kind of something that is outside of their wheelhouse, but you can't force it on your team. You can't mandate that everyone becomes a citizen developer. It has to be organic, and you have to bring everyone along on that journey.
Okay. So with that out of the way, let's get a little metaphysical. All right. So how will AI help us solve the three biggest challenges facing humanity today? Global health, climate crisis, and economic disparity in your order of priority.
Small problems, right?
Yes.
So what I would say is, I think the promise of AI is, in my opinion, is the ability to comprehend what I would call volumes of data, the velocity of data. And a human being can only deal with a few factors at best and be able to make rapid decisions. And so for me, when I look at AI, it has to be built with some social responsibilities as part of it. Otherwise, you build bias into this. Just like we have bias in normal life, you're going to recreate that in the cyber world if we are not careful. So putting these large volumes of data and then coming up with some hypothesis and some predictive ability for that is, I think, what's the future is available for us. However, I think it has to come in a way that the human has to still be in the loop. What do I mean by that is, so yeah, you have initial screening done through AI systems to say, these are the things that you should be considering before you make a decision, rather than have an AI system make the decisions for you. Then I think then we have really lost the ability to do good things because it'll totally be biased. And in a sense, in fact, I think there are studies that shows even in chess-playing computers, when you put the human in the loop with the chess-playing algorithms, the outcomes are far better than if the human did it by themselves or the algorithm or the computer played chess by itself. So I think we never should give up the fact that the human has to be in the loop, no matter how much automation we have in place.
Do you agree?
Yes, I completely agree. I would piggyback off of that. I think that goes towards this concept of kind of human augmentation. And so how do we incorporate these technologies? How do we incorporate AI so that it becomes an extension of our cognitive capabilities rather than something that is external to what we do? I think that combination is very compelling of can we enhance our ways of looking at the world, computational abilities by leveraging AI without, as you said, relegating AI to the side. I think that's going to be the game changer for sure.
But do you think AI can really address these biggest challenges facing us?
Yeah.
In combination with
human beings.
With human beings.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's analyzing volumes and volumes of data. I mean, when we talk about people historically with having a lot of experience, whether it's a physician having been in the field for 20 years, it's the amount of experience they've been exposed to that gives them a leg up on the type of decisions they make based on the parameters and the data they have collected over a lifetime. Now, even with that situation, they're still limited by the amount of what I would call variables that you can deal with. So your experience essentially supplements some of those things, but then you're kind of blind to new ideas. And I think the only way we can introduce that is to have large amount of dimensions that you have to look over and then come up with some sort of hypothesis as to what makes sense. And then the human has to come in and make the ultimate decision. So.
Okay. So Sasi, having worked at NASA, you've seen how technology and AI has got us so far in space. What do you think is the next horizon for AI and innovation? The next big thing?
Well, I don't know if it's the next best thing, but in terms of more and more automation is possible. Like I don't know if you know about the fact when we landed the lunar module on the surface of the moon, Neil Armstrong actually had to take over control of that because where it was going to land was on a big rock. And he only had 90 seconds of fuel left by the time he was able to put that in place. So the human, I think, will never, ever be supplanted by these technologies. They have to be part of it. So I think the whole idea is the biggest thing that's happening, I would say, is the improved resolution of data. I would say more sensors that accommodate what is possible in terms of the physical world. And then overall, you have to have human acceptance of these things in play. And I think when you put all those things together, I see a future that is sort of a combination of the benefits of technology with the presence of human decision making.
Okay. And Sidney, you've, of course, been in the forefront of intelligent automation. So where are you seeing it go in the future, and what do you think is the art of the possible when it comes to intelligent automation?
So I'll switch it and say the art of the impossible, because we get asked so many times to do things that are definitely defying the odds of what we think is feasible from an automation standpoint, specifically within the business. So whether it's handling large amounts of data, whether it's tackling compliance issues, whether it's financially data that we need to make sure is financially secure, we are looking at ways to actually combine new technologies. So we're looking at, can we leverage blockchain to secure sensitive data and then pass that data off to the robots to be able to leverage? This is just one example of basically building a new tool stack that it does not focus solely on robotic process automation, but instead encourages innovation through a combination of whether it's machine learning, artificial intelligence, optical character recognition. And the fundamental goal is that we can tackle more use cases with the ways that we're kind of thinking creatively about the way that we're going to tackle that business problem from an engineering standpoint.
Okay. Well, we were talking about this book that's just come out, The Age of AI and Our Human Future, written by, of all people, Henry Kissinger, and Eric Schmidt of Google, and then the Dean of MIT School of Computing. He talks about how AI is going to take over or have an influence in almost every human endeavor. So again, just from a philosophical standpoint, do you see AI being leveraged more for good, or is there a real possibility of, it ending up, destroying humanity or diverting human action and thought?
So every technology has its positives and negatives. And it's again up to the humans how to apply that for positive gains or for negative outcomes, right? So when you look at it from that perspective, I don't want to say I'm against technology, but we have to use technology with caution. The other thing we never talked about is when you talk about AI and so on and so forth, we sometimes think everything is basically algorithm based. Somehow we have to, if you want to push AI even further, you have to build in feelings and empathy into it, right? And otherwise, it basically becomes a robot. So actually, if you were to include that component of human compassion and empathy, now you're really talking about a completely different world than what we're used to. And again, there are dangers if it falls into the wrong hands, how it can be manipulated. So it's just two sides, right? It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, absolutely. So there need to be some guardrails around it, and obviously some ways to avoid the biases and.
Yeah, so I almost think this is why ethicists being in the mix is so pertinent. And I don't think that we talk enough about the ethical ramifications of the technological advances that, regardless of industry, we need, because there's a very specific way that the mind of an engineer works. And many times it's not by chance that, these kind of ethical considerations, they're just left by the wayside because you're just focused on solving a very specific business problem with that your structural focus on how you're going to automate that piece of the puzzle. So I think we need to do a better job if we don't want the technology to fall into the wrong hands, to get out of control. There has to be a focus on where are the philosophers, where are the ethicists, and how are they going to partner with the engineers to make sure that we're using technology in the right ways, and making sure also that all of the voices are heard, right? From making sure, as you said, bias, that we don't let bias creep into the processes, and then we're going to create automations that mimic a lot of the social challenges that we have today.
Okay.
I was going to say, I'm sure some of you are already familiar with the prototype that Microsoft built. If you're talking about machine learning, we basically use the training algorithms to teach itself. So what they did is they released that robot, basically, a bot, and it was basically listening to the conversations to the point it became totally racist and biased. They have to actually pull the plug on that, if you all remember, because what it learned through the internet just by listening was completely, totally unacceptable. So it's sort of a runaway machine with a mind of its own.
Yeah. And it was interesting too because that came from human behavior. So if I recall that scenario, humans started, trying to provoke a response in the machine, and that was the response, right? So it's hard to predict, what human behavior will be when we come into contact with these robots, right? Because it could be in jest, but that jest could really turn into a very serious situation rather quickly.
So it's like the old saying, right? If you are what your friends are made of, so the company you keep makes a big difference.
Right. Well, that's been a great discussion. We are at the end of our time here. Okay. Thank you for putting it all together. Hope you all got great value out of this. So thank you again, Sidney and Sasi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.